Constantinople, May 29, 1453. Dawn arrived the color of dried blood, casting its crimson light across marble palaces that had stood for 1,000 years. Princess Theodora Paleologina watched from her window as Sultan Mehmed II's cannons tore through the Theodosian walls, each impact sending tremors through the floor beneath her silk slippers. The great bombard, capable of hurling 600-pound stone balls across a mile of open ground, had finally accomplished what generations of invaders could not. The walls were breached. Ottoman soldiers poured through the gaps like floodwater, finding cracks in a dam. And Theodora understood with absolute certainty that her life as she knew it had ended. But death was not coming for her. Something else was. She had heard the stories whispered in the women's quarters. Accounts from Serbian and Bulgarian refugees who spoke of the Ottoman harem system with voices that shook. The tales always ended the same way, with the listener silent and pale, unable to articulate what made the fate of captured noblewomen so profoundly disturbing. Theodora had dismissed these stories as exaggerations born from grief and defeat. Now, hearing her father Emperor Constantine XI's final battle cry echoing from the walls as he charged to his death, she realized the stories had not gone far enough. The first Ottoman soldiers who entered the palace complex moved with eerie purpose. They carried no torches to set fires, no axes to smash icons, no ropes to bind captives for ransom. Instead, they carried lists. Written in neat Ottoman script were the names of specific individuals, their locations within the palace, and instructions for their treatment. When they found Princess Helena Paleologina hiding in the chapel of the Holy Apostles, clutching a golden crucifix that had belonged to her great-grandmother, the soldiers approached with something approaching reverence. They gently pried the crucifix from her fingers, speaking to her in broken Greek, and informed her that Sultan Mehmed II requested her presence at his pavilion. The courtesy in their voices carried more menace than any threat could have conveyed. This was not random violence. This was orchestration. Mehmed II had studied the conquest of Constantinople for years before attempting it. Examining not just the military challenges but the psychological ones, he understood that breaking walls was merely the beginning. To truly conquer a civilization, particularly one as old and proud as Byzantium, required breaking something far more difficult to rebuild the spirit of its people, and the Sultan had identified the most efficient method to accomplish this goal. Take the women who embodied Byzantine nobility, women who had lived their entire lives as symbols of divine appointment and imperial authority, and transform them into willing participants in their own culture's erasure. By nightfall, the surviving women of the imperial family found themselves confined in a commandeered Byzantine mansion under heavy guard. Outside, they could hear the sounds of Ottoman celebration victory feasts, music, the roar of soldiers toasting their success. But beneath these expected sounds came something more unsettling: hammering, sawing, the scrape of heavy materials being moved into position. The Ottomans were constructing something, and the work continued through the night with urgent intensity. Theodora lay awake in the darkness, listening to the rhythmic pounding of hammers, and felt dread settle into her bones like winter cold. Whatever they were building was being built specifically for her and the women imprisoned alongside her. The irony was precise and deliberate. These women had been born to the purple, as Byzantines called their imperial offspring, raised from birth to believe themselves barely below angels in the divine hierarchy. They had been educated by the finest scholars in Christendom, dressed in silks worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and had never experienced a moment when their will was not immediately satisfied by servants and courtiers. Their entire identity rested on their elevation above common humanity, their connection to a bloodline stretching back through centuries of emperors, crowned by patriarchs in ceremonies of sacred majesty. This exalted status, this sense of being chosen by God for greatness, was about to become the instrument of their destruction. The Ottoman harem system that awaited them was not simply a collection of concubines serving the Sultan's pleasure. It was a sophisticated institution of cultural transformation, designed with the precision of a military campaign and the patience of a long siege. The Topkapi Palace harem contained over 400 rooms spread across multiple buildings, each space carefully designed to serve a specific purpose in the process of conversion. The walls displayed the finest Persian carpets. The floors featured inlaid precious stones that caught lamplight and scattered it in patterns of sublime beauty. Every meal arrived on golden plates. Every bath was drawn with rose water imported from Damascus, and every comfort imaginable was provided without request. But beneath this luxury operated a system of psychological manipulation so refined that it could break the strongest will within months. And the breaking would feel like awakening rather than surrender. The process began immediately with the simplest and most profound act of cultural murder. Her name, Theodora, gift of God in Greek, a name that connected her to Byzantine empresses stretching back centuries, was discarded. She would now be called Gulbahar, Spring Rose in Turkish. To the Ottomans, this seemed like a kindness, a beautiful new name for a beautiful new life. But names carry identity, history, family, faith. Every time someone called her Gulbahar, a small piece of Theodora died. Every time she failed to respond to a birth name, she collaborated in her own erasure, and she would fail to respond, eventually, because the alternative was isolation so complete that madness became a genuine risk. The clothes came next. Byzantine imperial regalia wasn't merely fashion. The purple silk could only be worn by those born to the imperial family. The golden threads woven into the fabric depicted saints and angels. The very act of dressing represented a continuation of Roman authority blessed by God himself. Ottoman dress carried its own symbolism. The layers of silk, the way the fabric was draped, the specific colors and patterns, all of it represented submission to a different faith, a different culture, a different conception of divine order. When Theodora put on Ottoman clothes for the first time, she wasn't just changing her wardrobe, she was performing a ritual of conversion that her body understood even if her mind resisted. But the most insidious element of the harem system was how it used other captured women as agents of transformation. Theodora was unplaced among Ottoman women who might have treated her with the contempt due to a defeated enemy. That would have strengthened her resistance, given her something to push against. Instead, she was surrounded by other former Christian princesses, daughters of Serbian despots, granddaughters of Bulgarian czars, nieces of Albanian lords. All of them had undergone this same process. All of them had emerged on the other side as enthusiastic participants in Ottoman court life, and all of them now worked to bring Theodora along the same path. These women didn't threaten or intimidate. Instead, they befriended her. They comforted her during her first frightening nights. They shared stories of their own initial resistance and how foolish it seemed in retrospect. They spoke of the honor of serving the Sultan, the privilege of bearing his children, the way their former lives now seemed provincial and small compared to the cosmopolitan sophistication they had discovered. Some of this was performance, survival instinct dressed up as genuine belief, but some of it was real. The system had genuinely convinced these women that they had been rescued from inferior lives, and their testimonies carried the weight of lived experience. The daily routine was designed to gradually replace Byzantine habits with Ottoman ones. Morning prayers were no longer directed to Christ and his saints, but toward Mecca. Meals followed Islamic dietary laws, and the old Christian feast days passed unmarked while new celebrations took their place. Social interactions were governed by Ottoman court etiquette, which differed from Byzantine customs in 1,000 subtle ways. Even the language shifted. As Theodora insisted on speaking Greek, she found herself increasingly isolated. Conversations happened in Turkish around her. Jokes were told that she couldn't understand. The price of maintaining her linguistic identity was loneliness so profound that eventually she began to speak Turkish just to hear herself included in human society again. Perhaps most cruel was how the harem system offered genuine rewards for compliance. This wasn't a simple equation of resist and suffer, comply and survive. Women who embraced their new identity could rise to positions of real power. They could become favorites of the Sultan, which meant political influence that would have been impossible in their former lives. They could bear sons who might inherit the throne, which meant their bloodlines would rule empires instead of languishing in exile. The system didn't just punish resistance, it made resistance seem irrational, even self-destructive. Why cling to a dead empire when a living one offered so much more? 3 months after the fall of Constantinople, Princess Theodora Poliolagina committed her first overt act of collaboration. She had been resisting the daily Islamic prayers, maintaining her Christian devotions despite constant pressure from the other harem women and the religious instructors assigned to her education. But on August 15, 1453, the feast of the Assumption of Mary, a day sacred to her family and her faith, Theodora knelt on a Persian carpet facing Mecca and recited the Shahada, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger," the words that every Muslim speaks, the declaration that marks the boundary between one faith and another. She spoke them, and something inside her broke forever. What shattered her resistance wasn't torture or threats of death. It was something far more sophisticated. The Ottomans brought her a 7-year-old boy, dirty and frightened, speaking Greek with a Constantinople accent. They told her this child was her nephew, the son of her brother who had died defending the walls. They explained with apparent regret that the boy's fate depended entirely on her cooperation. If she converted to Islam, he would be raised in the palace as a privileged member of Ottoman society. If she refused, he would be sold to slave traders bound for the markets of North Africa. The child wasn't actually her nephew. Ottoman intelligence had identified a random Byzantine boy who could pass for imperial blood. But Theodora had no way of knowing this. Faced with what she believed was a choice between her spiritual integrity and a child's life, she made the choice the Ottomans knew she would make. And in making it, she became complicit in the system that had captured her. The wedding came 6 months later. Sultan Mehmed II summoned her to his private chambers, not as a conquered enemy or even as a concubine, but as his newest wife. The marriage ceremony was conducted according to Islamic law with great celebration throughout the Ottoman court. Theodora, now called Gulbahar, was dressed in robes covered in jewels worth more than the annual revenue of most European kingdoms. She was presented to the world as a willing bride who had chosen love over loyalty to her defunct empire. The propaganda value was incalculable. Every Christian territory still resisting Ottoman expansion learned that even Byzantine princesses recognized the superiority of Islam when given a fair choice. Every Muslim subject saw proof that their sultan's power could transform even the proudest enemies into devoted wives. 9 months after the wedding, Gulbahar gave birth to a son. The child was immediately declared a potential heir to the Ottoman throne. Theodora had not just betrayed her people, she had potentially given birth to their future conqueror. The boy would grow up speaking Turkish as his first language, worshipping Allah, viewing the Byzantine Empire as a relic of ignorant superstition that his father had wisely destroyed. When she held him for the first time, did she feel love or horror? Did she see a son or a weapon? The records don't say. Perhaps she felt both. Perhaps by then, the woman who had once been Theodora Paleologina was so thoroughly transformed into Gulbahar Sultan that she experienced only joy at bearing the Sultan's child. Other Byzantine noblewomen met similar fates, each carefully tailored to their specific circumstances and bloodlines. Princess Helena was married to a powerful Ottoman general, creating a living symbol of Christian submission to Islamic authority. The Duchess of Chios was given to a provincial governor, spreading the message of Ottoman dominance to the furthest reaches of the empire. Each marriage was a propaganda victory, a visible demonstration that the old order had not just been defeated but had chosen to join its conquerors, and the women who resisted, those who refused to convert and marry, found that martyrdom was not an option the Ottomans would grant them. They were isolated, stripped of privileges, and eventually sent to serve as domestic slaves in remote provinces where their imperial bloodlines meant nothing as they scrubbed floors for minor officials. Princess Theodora lived another 37 years as Gulbahar Sultan. She bore 3 more children to Mehmed II. She became one of the most influential women in the Ottoman court, wielding power that would have been impossible in Byzantine society. Contemporary accounts describe her as devoted to her husband, pious in her Islamic practice, and actively involved in the conquest and conversion of remaining Christian territories. Whether this represented genuine transformation or the ultimate victory of survival instinct over principle, no one can say. The Theodora who had trembled at her palace window watching Constantinople fall was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. And perhaps that was the cruelest fate of all. Not death, which would have preserved who she was, but transformation so complete that the victim became the perpetrator, and the conquered became the conqueror's most effective weapon. The historical record offers no redemption here, no last-minute revelation that Theodora maintained her true identity in secret. If she did, she took that knowledge to her grave. What remains is the objective fact of her collaboration, her children who grew up as Ottoman princes, her letters encouraging other Christian noblewomen to submit as she had done. The Ottomans didn't just defeat the Byzantine Empire, they transformed its symbols into advertisements for conquest, and they did it so skillfully that the victims themselves became willing participants in their own cultural extinction. Leave a comment below. After learning this story, do you think there truly are fates worse than death, or is survival, regardless of the cost, always the rational choice? This question has haunted historians for centuries, and it haunts us still.